Not all the battles for civil rights took place at rallies and marches. Some played out on America's playing fields and basketball courts. In 1950, Earl Lloyd became the first African American to play in an NBA regular season game. His starting salary was $4,000 a year. Nowadays, rookies make more than $400,000 a year. And of course, top players make millions. But they all owe a debt to this pioneer who broke the color barrier for basketball when he passed away this week at the age of 86. Of course, top players paid tribute. Vince Carter tweeted, "R.I.P. to Mr. Earl Lloyd. You opened that ever so important door for all African American athletes. Thank you." Well, Earl Lloyd went on to become a coach and was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. Arise News sports reporter Andrew Rosario has more on his life and legend. Andrew, he started, and of course, welcome. He started with the Washington Capitals.
Right.
And how did this actually come about? Because I think this was 3 years, correct me if I'm wrong, after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball.
It was a little longer than that. He was a ninth round draft pick with the Washington Capitals at the time. And one of the things that he said was that because basketball didn't have the fanfare that baseball had, you know, him getting not only drafted but making his NBA debut wasn't as big of a deal as the Jackie Robinson situation. But, you know, they called him Big Cat because he was 6'5", 225 pounds. He was a bruiser, an enforcer. In fact, one year he led the league in personal fouls and injections, but he helped the Syracuse Nationals win the 1955 championship, NBA championship, one of two, John Tucker being the other, to win the first African Americans to win an NBA championship.
We're talking about baseball, of course, being the nation's national pastime.
Exactly.
Some argue that point right now. Basketball has taken such a front and center stage, of course, along with the NFL. I guess the question is, who was the branch Rickey back then? Who spearheaded the move to bring Earl Lloyd in?
You know, it was a couple of guys. I mean, one of the general managers saw him play in college. Now, in 1947 and 1948, he led his college, West Virginia State, to an undefeated season. And then 2 years in a row, they won a championship. So because of that, and the funny thing about his story was he always said that from kindergarten all the way through college, he never had a white teammate at all. It wasn't until he got to the pros where he started playing with the white basketball players. And then in the stands, more white fans coming up. So he basically was the bridge to the current NBA players.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit, because it's much publicized what Jackie Robinson had to go to on and off the field amongst the players as well as the fans in the stands. What was life like for Earl Lloyd back then, especially during segregation, where apparently I would suspect he might not be able to stay in the same hotels with some of his teammates?
Right. And, you know, again, the arena is a lot smaller on the basketball court as compared to the baseball field where it's spread out. So, you know, you can hear just as much fan reaction to the players back then, and it was new for everybody.
In terms of, I'm thinking back to some of the days, the Harlem Renaissance, of course, the Globetrotters.
Right.
How much of an influence did they have in terms of it's changing this tide of integrating black players into the NBA?
Yeah, they did have an influence because they traveled all over the country as well. The New York Rens, one of the best basketball teams in the country, the Harlem Globetrotters, what they did for that sport.
Pop Gates.
Exactly. And Earl Lloyd, again, you know, he spent the majority of his years with the Syracuse Nationals, again, in winning that championship. And then he moved on to the Detroit Pistons, where at one point after he retired, he only played 2 years for Detroit. Then he became a scout and he coached them for a minute. So his legacy is well established.
Interesting, you know, we think about him, and of course players still remembering him, and that's a great thing. Some of these young players out here, Vince Carter and the like, remembering him. But, you know, we've come so far, Andrew, but yet and still we have an incident like we saw with the Los Angeles Clippers, the former owner. And racism still exists, I would say, somewhat, I guess. In the NBA.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, there was one point where the National Basketball Association stood for no blacks allowed until he came along and then started opening gates. He discovered Willis Reed. He discovered Earl Monroe. He discovered Dave Bing, some of the Hall of Fame players today as a result of the Big Cat.
Well, I got to tell you, it's an exciting story, one that certainly was full of trial and challenge, but a life well lived and a road well paved for the rest of us who especially myself who tried to play the game of basketball.
I know you got a jump shot.
I used to.
Okay.
A shot that I never wanted to turn down. Andrew Rosario, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Julian.
All righty.